I didn't think my career would end in a locked office with two security guards standing behind me. I didn't think 6 years of loyalty, overtime, and spotless performance reviews could disappear in one sentence. And I definitely didn't think the word sexual misconduct would ever be spoken about me, let alone written in an official termination letter with my name on it. But that's exactly how it happened. One moment, I was a department supervisor at a manufacturing plant I had helped stabilize and grow. The next, I was being escorted out of the building like a criminal, while my team watched in stunned silence. No explanation, no chance to defend myself, no details, just shame, confusion, and the cold certainty that something irreversible had just been done to my life. I'm 34 years old, I'm a woman, and I was fired for sexually harassing a subordinate, based on an accusation that never happened. What makes this worse isn't just that the allegation was false, it's that my company didn't even try to find out the truth. They didn't ask for witnesses. They didn't check the room where the accusation supposedly happened. They didn't look for evidence that could have cleared me in minutes. They believed her, and they destroyed me. Within days, my work email was locked, my access revoked, my reputation poisoned. When I tried to apply for another job, I learned the lie hadn't stopped at my firing. It was being repeated behind my back, quietly and efficiently, by people who knew exactly what they were doing. I was labeled dangerous, unhireable, a liability. I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every meeting, every decision I'd made as a supervisor, trying to understand how I had ended up here. I asked myself the same question over and over. What did I do wrong? The answer was terrifying. Nothing. And the truth, when it finally surfaced, was far worse than I ever imagined. Because this wasn't just a false accusation. It was a planned takedown. And the only reason I survived it was a security camera no one thought to check. Before the accusation, before the guards at my desk, before my name turned into a whisper people avoided saying out loud, my life was simple in the way hardworking lives usually are. Not easy, not glamorous, but stable. I'm Hannah, and I was 34 when everything fell apart. For 6 years, I worked at a mid-sized manufacturing company that produced automotive parts, metal components that had to meet strict standards because they ended up inside vehicles. It wasn't the kind of job people bragged about at parties, but it was honest work, measurable work, the kind where doing things right mattered. Because a small mistake didn't just mean an angry email, it could mean product failures, safety risks, and contracts lost. I started there in my late 20s as a line lead, the kind of role where you learn quickly that respect isn't given because of a title. It's earned because you show up, you do the job, and you protect your people. Eventually, I became a department supervisor. 12 employees reported directly to me. 12 different personalities, 12 different rhythms. Some were young and hungry to grow. Some were older, steady, and tired of workplace drama. My job was to keep the department running. Inspections, packaging, meeting deadlines, avoiding defects, making sure we didn't ship something that would come back to haunt us. I wasn't the cool boss. I wasn't the boss who flirted or tried to be everyone's friend. I kept it professional. I didn't need people to like me. I needed them to trust me. And for years, they did. I had a manager above me named Robert. He was 45, plant manager, the kind of man who measured success in numbers and quiet compliance. He liked things smooth, no surprises, no complaints. He wasn't cruel exactly, just the type who'd rather cut off a problem than deal with the mess of solving it properly. HR was led by Michelle, 38, sharp and polished. She spoke like every sentence was already part of a policy document. She wasn't openly warm, but she was competent, and in a company like ours, people respected competence. The job itself was demanding, but I was good at it, maybe too good. That's the part I didn't understand until later. Because when you're good, when you're reliable, when you can carry a department through chaos, you start to matter. And when you matter, you become an obstacle to anyone who wants your seat. At the time, though, I wasn't thinking about politics. I was thinking about quality control. One of my employees was named Samantha, 28. She'd been with the company 3 years, and for most of that time, she'd been fine. Nothing exceptional, nothing alarming. But 2 months before everything happened, she started slipping. At first, it was small things. A number written wrong, a form left incomplete, a defect missed that should have been obvious. Then it became a pattern. I heard through the grapevine that she was going through a messy divorce and a custody battle. And I'm not a heartless person. Stress can eat away at your focus. I understood that. I even tried to protect her from embarrassment. When she made mistakes, I corrected them quietly. I spoke to her informally. I asked if she needed support, if she needed schedule flexibility, if something was going on. She always smiled too quickly and said, "I'm fine." But her work wasn't fine. One week, she marked defective parts as acceptable twice. If QA hadn't caught it, we could have shipped bad products straight to a manufacturer. The kind of error that triggers audits, penalties, and sometimes layoffs. The kind that puts everyone under a microscope. I remember staring at the scratched metal components in my hand, feeling my jaw tighten, thinking, I can't keep covering this. So I decided to handle it the right way. Not publicly, not loudly, not in front of other employees. Professionally. On a Tuesday morning, I saw another inspection report with her signature. Another batch approved that clearly didn't meet spec. Scratches. Visible defects. No way she should have missed them. I walked over to her workstation. 3 other team members were nearby. Samantha was seated, shoulders slightly hunched, her hair pulled back like she'd rushed out the door. I kept my voice calm. "Hey, Samantha," I said, resting the paperwork against my palm. "Can you step into the storage room with me for a few minutes? I want to go over something privately." She looked relieved, actually, like she appreciated that I wasn't calling her out in front of everyone. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Sure." The storage room was small, utilitarian, metal shelving, stacked boxes, extra packaging materials, some expensive testing equipment we kept locked away. It wasn't a secret place. It wasn't romantic. It smelled like cardboard and machine oil. I brought the inspection reports and the rejected parts. I showed her exactly what she missed. We talked for about 15 minutes. 15 minutes that would later be twisted into the ugliest story of my life. At the time, it felt normal. Work, correction, accountability. Samantha apologized. She said she'd been overwhelmed. She said she'd do better. She even thanked me for handling it privately, said she appreciated my professionalism. We stood a few feet apart the entire time. I never touched her. I never said anything inappropriate. I never even raised my voice. When we walked back out into the main work area, I remember thinking, briefly, quietly, okay, maybe this will be the moment she gets it together. I had no idea that within an hour, I'd be sitting in Robert's office with security behind me, hearing words that didn't belong in my life. And I had no idea that the person who would accuse me wasn't the only one involved. Because what happened next wasn't random. It was a setup. I didn't realize it at the time, but the damage didn't start in the storage room. It started after we walked out. Samantha went back to her station. I went back to my desk. The hum of the plant continued like nothing had changed. Machines running, pallets rolling, people moving through their routines. On the surface, everything looked normal. But something shifted in the air. About 30 minutes later, I noticed Carol watching me. Carol was 41, a supervisor at the same level as me, but over a different department. She'd been with the company longer than I had, and she carried herself like someone who expected to move up. Chin high, voice confident, always talking about leadership optics and representation. She wasn't unfriendly, but there was a sharpness to her, like she was always evaluating the room for advantage. I didn't think much of it at first. Supervisors watched each other all the time. That's how workplaces like ours operated, quiet competition wrapped in polite professionalism. Later, I found out she had seen Samantha and me walk into the storage room together. At the time, all I noticed was that Samantha looked different when she came back. Quieter, tense. She avoided eye contact with me for the rest of the shift, which I chalked up to embarrassment. No one likes being corrected, even when it's deserved. I finished my reports, answered emails, signed off on end-of-day numbers. I had no idea that while I was doing my job, someone else was planting a narrative. Carol approached Samantha later that morning. I wasn't there to see it, but I would eventually hear every detail. Carol asked what we'd discussed in the storage room. Samantha explained. Work errors, inspections, expectations. That should have been the end of it, but Carol didn't let it go. She told Samantha that it looked bad, that a female employee being taken into a private room by a female supervisor, even for work reasons, could still be interpreted the wrong way. She said HR was sensitive to these situations. She said complaints like that were taken very seriously. At first, Samantha resisted. She knew nothing inappropriate had happened, but Carol kept talking. She reminded Samantha about her performance issues, about how close she might be to disciplinary action if mistakes continued. She suggested, carefully, strategically, that filing a complaint could protect her, that it could shift attention away from her errors. And then she said the sentence that would ruin my life. If you say something, Carol told her, they'll have to act. They always do. By the time my shift ended that day, the seed had been planted. I went home tired, thinking about production numbers and deadlines, unaware that my name was already being passed between offices, quietly, urgently, with concern-laced tones that suggested danger where there was none. The next morning, I didn't even make it to my desk. 2 security guards were waiting. Robert was standing with them, arms crossed, face tight. He told me I needed to come with him immediately, that a complaint had been filed, that I was being suspended pending investigation. I asked what the complaint was. He wouldn't tell me. And in that moment, standing there, surrounded by people I'd worked beside for years, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Because the way he looked at me wasn't confused. It was cautious, like I was already guilty. The moment Robert closed his office door, I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a sentence. "Sit down," he said, not unkindly, but without warmth. The 2 security guards positioned themselves near the wall, arms folded, eyes forward. They didn't look at me. They didn't have to. I stayed standing for a second longer than I should have. "What's this about?" I asked. My voice sounded steady, but my heartbeat had started to pound so hard I could feel it in my throat. Robert exhaled slowly, like he was choosing his words from a script he didn't write, but had memorized anyway. "A female employee has filed a sexual harassment complaint against you." The room tilted. I actually laughed once. Short, sharp, involuntary, because my brain refused to accept the sentence as real. "That's not possible," I said immediately. "There has to be some mistake." Robert didn't react. "I can't discuss specifics," he said. "Company policy requires that you be suspended effective immediately while an investigation is conducted." Suspended. Not asked, not questioned, not given a chance to explain. I leaned forward, palms on the desk. "Robert, tell me what I'm being accused of," I said. "Tell me who it is. I haven't done anything." "I'm not allowed to disclose details during an active investigation," he interrupted. "If the claims are found to be unsubstantiated, you'll receive full back pay." The word sexual harassment echoed in my head like a siren. "Who is saying this?" I asked again. He shook his head. "I need you to collect your personal belongings," he said, nodding toward the guards. "They'll escort you out." I stared at him. 6 years. 6 years of loyalty, weekends, late shifts, covering gaps, fixing problems before they reached his desk. And this was it. I walked back through the plant with the guards behind me. People stopped working when they saw us. Conversations died mid-sentence. Someone dropped a box and didn't even bend to pick it up. I could feel eyes on my back, speculating, judging, deciding who I was without knowing a single fact. At my desk, I packed silently. A framed photo, a notebook, my water bottle. My hands were shaking so badly I had to stop twice just to breathe. No one spoke to me. Not one person. When I stepped outside, the sun was too bright. The air felt wrong in my lungs, like I'd been underwater and surfaced too fast. I drove home in a daze. That night, I tried to log into my work email. Access denied. The next morning, I called Robert. No answer. Thursday, Friday, nothing. Exactly 1 week later, a certified letter arrived. Employment terminated for sexual misconduct. I sat on the floor with the letter in my hands, reading words that described actions I never took. Exposure. Advances. Inappropriate behavior in a private room. I felt sick. This wasn't just my job. This was my reputation. And it was being erased in ink. For a long time after I read the letter, I didn't move. I sat on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, the envelope torn open beside me, the words "sexual misconduct" burning into my vision every time I looked down. My phone buzzed once with a notification, then went silent again. The world didn't end dramatically. It just kept going. And somehow that made it worse. I replayed the storage room conversation over and over in my head. Where was I standing? How close had we been? Did I say something that could be twisted? Did I gesture too sharply? Hold eye contact too long? I knew the answer, but doubt is insidious when you're alone with it. It creeps in through the cracks, whispering, "What if you missed something? What if you don't remember it the way they do?" By the second night, I hadn't slept. My chest felt tight, like I was constantly bracing for impact. Every sound outside my apartment made me flinch. I kept imagining former coworkers talking about me, my name sliding into conversations with lowered voices and raised eyebrows. I called a lawyer the next morning. He listened patiently, then said the words I didn't want to hear. "Without witnesses or evidence, these cases are very difficult. It's often your word against theirs. Companies usually side with the accuser to reduce liability." Liability. That was it. That was the reason my life had been detonated. Not because anyone knew the truth, but because the truth was inconvenient. After the call, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my hands. They looked the same, capable, steady. These were the hands that had signed off on shipments, fixed errors, trained employees. And now, according to a piece of paper, they belonged to a predator. I thought about my team, about the trust we'd built, about the way Samantha had thanked me for handling the conversation privately. I felt sick. Then, late that night, I remembered something. A throwaway conversation from months earlier. A friend named Kurt, who used to work in IT before he left the company. He'd once mentioned that the storage room had a security camera because of the expensive equipment kept there. I sat up so fast my chair scraped the floor. Please let that be true. I messaged Kurt immediately, my fingers flying across the screen, barely able to breathe while I waited for his reply. When my phone buzzed back less than an hour later, I almost dropped it. Yes, he wrote, that room definitely has a camera. Records continuously, footage kept at least 30 days. I stared at the message. For the first time since everything started, something inside me shifted. Not relief, not hope, something sharper, resolve. Because if that footage still existed, then the truth hadn't disappeared. It was just waiting to be seen. Kurt didn't hesitate. When I asked if he could help me get the footage, he didn't lecture me about risks or policies. He didn't tell me to let it go or warn me that I was poking a bear. He just said, I'll see what I can do. 2 days later, I was sitting at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched, watching my life play back on his laptop. The camera angle was wide, unforgiving, clear. There I was, walking into the storage room with Samantha, paperwork in my hand. There she was, standing across from me, arms folded, nodding, while I pointed at inspection reports. The audio picked up everything. My calm tone, her apologies, the unmistakably professional nature of the conversation. No touching, no raised voices, no hesitation, no misconduct. I felt my knees weaken with relief and rage all at once. This is it, I whispered. This proves everything. Kurt nodded grimly. It proves you're innocent. But innocence, I was about to learn, wasn't enough. I called Robert that afternoon and left a voicemail, my voice steady but tight. I have video and audio footage from the storage room, I said. It proves the allegation against me is false. If the company doesn't address this immediately, I'll be contacting legal counsel. For the first time since my suspension, Robert called me back. Within 2 hours. He sounded different, alert now, careful. The next morning, I was on a conference call with Robert and Michelle, HR director. They admitted they hadn't known about the camera, admitted their investigation had relied entirely on the complaint. They told me they'd already hired my replacement, a woman named Lisa, and because she'd already left her previous job, they couldn't simply undo the decision. Instead, they offered me a settlement, back pay, a voluntary resignation on my record, positive references moving forward. They said it like it was generous. I felt my hands curl into fists. You accused me of sexual misconduct, I said slowly. You ended my career without evidence. That offer doesn't even begin to address the damage you've done. I told them my terms. They refused. Then Robert tried to intimidate me, claiming I'd signed an arbitration agreement when I was hired. I asked for proof. The call ended in silence. Over the next week, I tried to rebuild, applying for jobs, calling contacts, leaning on professional relationships I thought I'd earned. And then Marcus called. His voice was tight when he told me the truth. Someone from my old company had warned his HR department not to hire me, had claimed I was a sexual predator. That charges were pending. My legs gave out when I hung up. This wasn't damage control anymore. This was sabotage. That night, I hired a lawyer. And this time, I wasn't asking to be cleared. I was ready to fight. The night after I hired the lawyer, I sat alone in my apartment with all the lights off. Not because I wanted the dark, but because it felt honest. Everywhere I looked, there were reminders of the life I'd built and lost. The suit jacket hanging untouched by the door. The planner on the counter, still open to a week that would never happen. My phone buzzed occasionally with spam emails and notifications I didn't care about anymore. What I cared about was the question I couldn't escape. What if this never goes away? False accusations don't fade quietly. They linger. They follow you into rooms you've never been in. They turn neutral faces suspicious and friendly smiles cautious, even when you're innocent, even when you know you're innocent. The doubt sticks like a stain you didn't earn. I'd done everything right. I'd handled Samantha privately. I'd stayed professional. I'd followed policy. And still I was here, jobless, branded, isolated. My lawyer warned me it wouldn't be quick. that companies dig in when their reputations are threatened, that they might try to outlast me financially, emotionally, that even with evidence, justice wasn't guaranteed. That was when the fear really set in. What if I spent years fighting this? What if every future employer only half believed the truth? What if my name was always followed by a quiet pause? I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing like it belonged to someone else. I thought about giving up, about accepting the settlement, about taking a different career path, about disappearing the way people expect women to do when they're too much trouble. That thought hurt more than anything, because I wasn't the one who did something wrong. Still, the weight was crushing. Then my lawyer called. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "We're filing suit," she said, "against the company and against Samantha individually." I closed my eyes. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means the pressure shifts," she replied. "If Samantha has to defend herself personally, she can't hide behind the company. She'll need her own lawyer, and people tell the truth when the cost of lying gets too high." After the call, I cried, not because I was weak, but because I was exhausted. This was the lowest point, the moment where the future felt fragile and uncertain, where survival meant choosing to stand up when everything in you wanted to lie down. I didn't know if I'd win. I just knew I couldn't let them erase me. The first crack in the wall came faster than I expected. 2 weeks after Samantha was served with the lawsuit papers, my lawyer called me early in the morning. I could tell from her tone, measured, almost careful, that something had changed. "Samantha's attorney reached out," she said. "She wants to talk." My stomach tightened. "About what?" I asked. "A confession," my lawyer replied, "in exchange for being dropped from the lawsuit." I didn't speak for a long moment. For weeks, Samantha had been the face of what happened to me, the name attached to the accusation that shattered my life. I had imagined her cold, calculating, confident in the damage she'd done. The idea that she was now afraid enough to tell the truth felt unreal. We met in a neutral office a few days later. Samantha looked smaller than I remembered. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She didn't look triumphant. She looked trapped. She admitted it quickly. She told us she had never believed I did anything inappropriate, not for a second. She said the meeting in the storage room had been professional, calm, exactly what a supervisor should do. Then she told us about Carol, how Carol had approached her after the meeting, how she'd framed the situation as dangerous optics, how she'd warned Samantha that her job was at risk because of her performance issues, how she'd suggested over and over that filing a complaint would protect her. And then came the part that made my chest go cold. Carol had promised that if Samantha filed the complaint, I would be fired. Guaranteed. She said the company would do it to avoid liability, that they wouldn't investigate too deeply, that they'd act fast and quietly. Samantha admitted Carol had helped her write the complaint, suggested the most damaging details, encouraged her to exaggerate, to accuse me of exposure and advances, because those claims would make the company panic. I listened without interrupting. When Samantha finally broke down crying, saying she'd been desperate, scared of losing her job, drowning financially because of her divorce, I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity, because this was no longer about one false accusation. This was a deliberate conspiracy. And the motive? Carol wanted my position. She had been lobbying to promote Lisa, one of her subordinates, but there were no open supervisory roles. Getting rid of me created one. Samantha's complaint was the tool. My reputation was the collateral. When my lawyer contacted the company with this information, everything shifted. Fast. Their legal department launched an internal investigation immediately. Emails were pulled, witnesses interviewed, and within days, the truth surfaced like a body that refuses to stay buried. Carol was fired. Samantha was fired. Another employee who had spread false references was suspended. And suddenly, the company that had ignored me was calling, apologizing, scrambling to contain the damage. They offered reinstatement, back pay, a raise, public correction letters. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Because in that moment, I finally understood something. They never had power over me. They just counted on me believing they did. Once the truth was out, it moved faster than any lie ever had. The company didn't announce Carol's termination publicly, but people noticed. Her office was cleared out overnight. Her name disappeared from internal directories. Conversations stopped when her department was mentioned. In places like that, silence is louder than any memo. Samantha was gone too. No goodbye email, no explanation, just absence. Jennifer, the administrative employee who had been poisoning my references, was suspended first, then quietly let go a few weeks later. The damage she'd done was already documented, already traced back to Carol's instructions. Unauthorized action, the company called it. But by then, the truth was undeniable. This hadn't been one mistake. It had been a chain. And chains, once exposed, pull everything down with them. The company's tone toward me changed completely. Where there had been defensiveness, there was now urgency. Where there had been threats about arbitration, there were apologies. The CEO sent a formal letter acknowledging that I had been wronged. They offered reinstatement to my exact role, full back pay, a 15% salary increase, and written corrections to any company that had received false information about me. They even offered to personally contact competitors to set the record straight. It was everything I'd asked for. And somehow, it didn't feel like victory. When I walked back into the plant for my first day after reinstatement, heads turned, but this time, not with suspicion. With relief. With embarrassment. With respect that came too late. Robert held a department meeting and framed it as a misunderstanding. He didn't say my name much, didn't mention Carol directly. He just said the allegations were false and that I had been fully cleared. People clapped. A few came up to me afterward and said they'd never believed it, that they'd been shocked when I was fired, that they were glad I was back. I thanked them. But trust doesn't come back just because the truth shows up. I noticed the changes immediately. 3 of my original team members had been reassigned while I was gone. Productivity was down. Deadlines were tighter. The department felt off balance, like a machine that had been forced to run without its stabilizers. Robert avoided eye contact with me in the halls. 2 weeks later, he called me into his office. This time there were no guards. He apologized. Not perfectly, not fully, but enough to acknowledge that he had failed me. He said the company had overcorrected in response to past harassment cases, that they'd prioritized speed over fairness, that they were reviewing procedures now. I listened. And when he finished, I told him the truth. I'm here, I said, but I'm not staying forever. He nodded, like he already knew. Because even though I'd been vindicated, the cost was clear. My name had been dragged through rooms I would never enter. My career had been interrupted by a lie that could have ended everything. And the people who let it happen? They didn't lose nearly as much as I did. I didn't retaliate. I didn't gloat. I didn't try to punish anyone beyond what the truth already had. I just started planning my exit. Quietly, carefully, on my terms. I left the company 6 weeks later. Not in anger, not in defeat, but with clarity. I accepted a position at a larger manufacturing firm about an hour away, better pay, stronger safeguards, and, most importantly, a culture built on documentation and accountability. When I handed in my notice, Robert looked relieved. I think my presence had become a reminder of everything the company had done wrong, and it was easier for everyone to let me go than to keep confronting that reality. My last day was quiet. A few team members hugged me. Others simply nodded with respect. Lisa, who had never known about Carol's plan, thanked me for my professionalism and said she'd learned a lot from watching how I handled the aftermath. I wished her well. None of this had been her fault. As for Samantha, I never heard from her again. I don't know where she ended up, and I don't wonder. Understanding why someone hurts you doesn't mean you have to keep carrying them with you. My new job has been different in all the ways that matter. Conversations are documented. Meetings aren't held behind closed doors. Transparency isn't just a slogan, it's policy. I don't feel like I'm constantly bracing for the floor to fall out beneath me. I also changed. I learned that being professional isn't always enough to protect you, that systems designed to prevent harm can be manipulated by people with bad intentions, and that silence, whether from fear, convenience, or complacency, can destroy innocent lives just as effectively as lies. But I also learned something else. The truth doesn't need to be loud to win. It just needs to be preserved. I didn't come out of this as a hero. I didn't get justice that erased the pain. What I got was something quieter but stronger, my name back, my voice intact, my future under my control. If there's one lesson I want anyone watching this to take with them, it's this. Protect yourself. Document everything. And never assume that doing the right thing will automatically protect you, because sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and someone else's ambition. I survived, and I moved forward.